Hello, I'm Ross Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. All week long, you've been concerned about the situation in Ivory Coast. And there are two men at the heart of this crisis. Alassane Ouattara, the UN-recognised president of the country. And then we have Laurent Gbagbo, who's living in the cellar of the presidential compound in Abidjan, saying he should remain in power. Over the next hour, we'll have representatives of both men answering your questions. Well, let me introduce you to our two guests. Balaye Topler is a Paris-based spokesman for Laurent Gbagbo, and Jacques Ndouba is a London representative of the PDCI, which is one of the political parties in Ivory Coast that's supporting Alassane Ouattara. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Now, before both men start answering your questions, let's bring ourselves up to date with all of the day's news. And we'll begin in Ivory Coast, where aid agencies are now warning that the humanitarian crisis in Abidjan is being exacerbated. They say that continuing violence is preventing help from reaching those who need it. On the same issue, the UN has appealed for safe access to civilians who are fleeing the fighting. Staying in Ivory Coast, the UN has reported that it's found 100 bodies in Dwekwe and 2 other western towns. The UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights says that the murders appear to be ethnically motivated. Well, from Ivory Coast to the situation in Libya, NATO has said it strongly regrets the loss of life after a friendly fire attack on rebel tanks in eastern Libya, which left at least 4 fighters dead. Earlier, a NATO commander had refused to apologise, saying that until Thursday's strike, the alliance hadn't been aware that the rebels had tanks. For several months now, Fridays have brought anti-government protests in the Arab world, and in Syria today, it's claimed that security forces have fired live ammunition on protesters in the southern city of Daraa and that 4 people have been killed. There have also been reports of gunfire in a suburb of Damascus. Meanwhile, in Yemen, tens of thousands of people have held pro- and anti-government protests. These demos come at the end of a week when at least 20 people have died during further unrest. But Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh is not going anywhere. As he's done time and time again, he's refusing to step down and has rejected an exit plan proposed by Gulf Arab states. Now, with many of you calling on the International Criminal Court to play a role in Libya and Ivory Coast, Kenya's Deputy Prime Minister Uhuru Kenyatta is appearing in The Hague today. He's accused of organising a vigilante group which carried out attacks after the disputed 2007 election. Mr. Kenyatta is the son of Kenya's first president, and he denies the allegations. Well, Balaye Topler and Jacques Ndouba, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BBC's World Have Your Say. Those of you watching around the world, you'll see all of our contact details on the screen. You can send in questions for these political allies of Laurent Gbagbo and of Alassane Ouattara. They're live and they're ready to take your questions. Let's begin with an email that's come in through Facebook from Joel, who says, aren't there any non-violent methods to get rid of Gbagbo and put Ouattara in charge? The longer the Ivory Coast crisis prolongs, the more it will become a humanitarian disaster. Well, Jacques Ndouba, you support Alassane Ouattara. Do you also support the military action which he sanctioned over the past few days?
In my view, the military option was not the first one. But we came to the situation whereby we have to take this action against Mr. Gbagbo. But Gbagbo has failed to comply with any process of dialogue, negotiation. So this is why we come to this situation. And Mr. Gbagbo today is hiding into the cave. And I think he's playing around the positive attitude of Mr. Ouattara, who warned that no one should harm him nor kill him. So this is the card that is playing about.
OK, so you say there is no option and that the blame must lie with Laurent Gbagbo. Balaye Topler in Paris, what's your view of the military action which Alassane Ouattara has sanctioned?
Charlie, I'm really surprised because the situation we are facing in Côte d'Ivoire is just a conflict, a post-electoral conflict. We have example of other parts of the world. Let me remind you the example of California, when President Bush and candidate Al Gore was opponents. The only standard we have when we have a post-electoral conflict, we recount the vote. That's as simple as that. So I don't know why it is not possible in Ivory Coast to recount the vote.
Well, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things to mention here, Mr. Toppler. First of all, I think you're referring to Florida rather than California. But secondly, why would we need to recount the vote when the UN, which was invited in by Laurent Gbagbo and by Alassane Ouattara, has declared Mr. Ouattara the winner? Shouldn't that be enough?
Mr. Ouattara is declared winner on what basis? Look at the situation we have during that election. In more than 2,000 rolling stations, we got more voters than people registered. Out of that, we have 500 polling stations where Mr. Gbagbo got 0 votes.
Okay, but let's just reiterate to everyone watching exactly where we are with this election, because it's important for us to know this before we discuss the crisis. In early December, the Electoral Council in Ivory Coast declared that Alassane Ouattara had won. The UN agreed with that. The Constitutional Council in Ivory Coast then came out and said it didn't agree, but the UN said, no, this is the view that we believe. And ever since then, the international community has supported what the UN saw. And it's worth mentioning as well, the UN was invited in to help run these elections. Let's bring in Saudi, who is live with us from Abidjan. Saudi, good to speak to you. We talked a little while ago on BBC Radio. First things first, how are things in your neighborhood in Abidjan?
Well, the neighbors, the area is a little bit quiet, only the security.
And are you able to get the food and the water which you were looking for when I spoke to you a couple of days ago?
No, for now the taps are open because the president has authorized the manager to open the taps for the population to sustain.
So you're saying that the water is coming through at the moment in your neighborhood. And Saudi, what question would you like to ask the political allies of Gbagbo and Ouattara who we have on today's program?
Well, the question I want to ask is how are you going to do to avoid the humanitarian crisis?
Okay, well, let's take that point. Jacques Nduba, you're a supporter of Alassane Ouattara. What needs to happen now to avoid the humanitarian crisis, which is already in progress, not just in Abidjan, but elsewhere in Ivory Coast and across the borders in Liberia and Ghana? What would you do now? What will your man do now?
Yes, what happened since yesterday is that the president has outlined his major area for action, and he has invited the director of the water company, the electricity company directors, and everybody involved in the security of the country, the well-being of the country population, to try to take action now. So in the time being, anytime to Saturday or next week, everything is going to come to normality. So they have to be a bit patient within 2 or 3 days. But I think that, okay, action has been taking place since yesterday.
So that's your answer, Jacques. Balier Toppler, you're a supporter of Laurent Gbagbo. What would you have your man do to sort out this humanitarian crisis?
I think that the only thing we can do is to come back to the post-electoral conflict and the way we can solve it. What doesn't belong to the post-electoral crisis? Gbagbo didn't invade another country. He just disagreed with his opponent about election. So if a UN that exceed its order come back at the table of a negotiation, probably we can find a common ground so that the two opponents can find the way to solve that crisis.
And as you're talking, sir, we can see pictures taken today from Abidjan, the main city in Ivory Coast. I can see that Jeffrey in Uganda has got in touch at facebook.com/World Have Your Say, saying, these are the kicks of a dying horse. Gbagbo has lost legitimacy and sympathy with almost all of his people. Well, Jeffrey's in Uganda. Let's bring in Sele Marius, who's co-founder of Abidjan Live, which is a website run by a number of journalists in the city. Sele, first of all, tell us about the situation in your part of the city.
Well, as for today, the place, my place is quiet. I can hear gunfire at the time being, and people are trying to get out into the street to see the way they could find basic food stuff to feed themselves. So the situation is still tense, but people are trying their best, to avoid starvation now. But things, we hope, will return to normal soon, as we can't hear, let's say, gunfire now, and people are trying to go out into the streets. But there's still a problem with security matter, as the place is not really secure as it used to be.
So, Sele, you were echoing what Saudi was saying, that things are better than they have been in the week, but while you're speaking to us, you say you can still hear gunfire. I wonder what question you would like to ask our two guests who are allies of Laurent Gbagbo and of Alassane Ouattara.
Well, first of all, I would like to put a question to the representative of Mr. Alassane Ouattara. My question is that war is just a part of the story. The whole story, is about the two halves. And so the other part is about how people will cope with the aftermath of the war. I'm talking about security matter, because we still have plenty of armed youth into the street, and militiamen bearing, let's say, a rifle and AK-47, threatening civilians into the street. Do they think that...
Let's pick up on those issues, because this is fascinating. I noticed while taking calls on BBC Radio this week that more people in Abidjan were concerned about looting than they were about the fighting between Ouattara and Gbagbo forces. Jacques Ndouba, what are you going to do? What is Alassane Ouattara going to do to return law and order, not just to Abidjan, but to the whole country?
What is underway at the moment is that all security authorities are involved now to reassure the population by going street to street to reassure them that, thing is taking place progressively for the security matter. And, in the interior of the country, outside Abidjan, the same action have been taking place. So what they need to know is progressively, because things have started since yesterday, and progressively we're going to go there. But they have to be a bit patient, because we got the National Army in place at the moment. We got the UN Army in place, and the French troop as well. Those people are trying to help the country to get back to normality. But I hope that, any time to next week, we're going to get a better situation than before.
Well, I'm interested to hear from Saleh whether he is convinced by what you're saying. And as you're talking, we can see pictures of the French military assisting some people to get out of Abidjan. But we know from many people who call and listen and watch the BBC that many of you in Abidjan simply can't get out. If you are watching and want to call us up, we're live. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We'll speak to Saleh in Abidjan, as well as going back to Balaye Tople, Laurent Gbagbo's spokesperson in Paris, after we've taken a couple of minutes break. Hi, welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're live on BBC World News all week long. You've been telling us about your concern about what's happening in Ivory Coast. And today, live on the programme, we have two senior political allies of the men at the heart of this crisis. Someone who supports Alassane Ouattara is Jacques Ndouba. He's with the PDCI political party. That's not Alassane Ouattara's party, but it is a party that's part of the coalition supporting Alassane Ouattara's claim to the presidency. We also have Balaye Tople live with us from Paris. He's a spokesperson for Laurent Gbagbo. And just before the news, we were speaking to Sele, who runs the Abidjan Live website. Sele, you wanted to know what Alassane Ouattara would do to return law and order to Ivory Coast. We heard from Jacques an answer. Were you convinced by what he told you?
Yeah, but I think Mr. Jacques is not, pointing out details, because we need details. We don't need, mere words. We need detail, because what we see on the ground is quite different from what, people have been saying, in speeches. So on the ground is another matter of security. They can't say that they will try to do all the best to bring back security and to keep the town safe. But we need concrete action on the ground. So this is why I was asking this question to Mr. Jacques.
Thank you very much indeed, Saleh. We appreciate you joining us. If you want to see the work that Saleh does from Abidjan, stick Abidjan Live into your search engine online and you'll find it. OK, let's pull up another email here from Fatou Keita, who's a novelist in Abidjan. It's actually not an email. He wrote this piece on the New York Times website and we picked it up because it was being pushed around on Twitter. He writes, "When the shooting is heavy, I yell at everyone to lie flat in the hallway. My little granddaughter is terrified. Some of my neighbours have bullets in their walls." And Sir Ballier in Paris, when you hear those kind of accounts, don't you think it would be best for everyone in Ivory Coast if your man Laurent Gbagbo surrendered and let the country move on?
I think that my concern, the security problem in Ivory Coast is my concern for those who are living there. We have our relatives. And I'm convinced that war is not a game. And if we can prevent war, that should be the solution.
But so you know how to prevent war in Ivory Coast. Laurent Gbagbo could pick up the telephone and say, OK, I accept what the whole world is saying. My opponent has won. I give myself up. And in a flash, you would resolve many of these problems.
Unfortunately, Mr. Ouattara, the international community tried to put on power, didn't win the election in Côte d'Ivoire. And I think the best way to solve that problem is to take the election report and go through the report to see that Mr. Ouattara didn't win the election. We have case we brought before the Constitutional Council. And based on that claim, Mr. Gbagbo is declared winner. If the community didn't agree, they have to go through the process and they will realize that Mr. Gbagbo is the winner. That's as simple as that.
All right, well, you say Mr. Gbagbo is the winner. I'm going to reiterate what I was saying earlier because this is important. The UN was invited to take part in this election, help organise it and also sanction the result. On December the 2nd, the Electoral Commission in Ivory Coast came out and said Alassane Ouattara had won. The UN sanctioned that result. The next day, the Constitutional Council, which constitutionally can trump the Electoral Commission, came out and said, no, actually, Laurent Gbagbo has won. But the crucial thing here is that both Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara both invited the UN in to sanction this election on a one-off basis. And this is why we have a tension between the one-off arrangement with the UN and the long-term constitutional arrangement that sits with the Constitutional Court. I hope that explains it just about as clearly as I can. Ballier Toppler, thank you very much indeed for responding to that point. If you're watching and want to put points to allies of Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara, the World Have Your Say team are taking your calls live. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We've heard from a couple of people in Abidjan already. Let's go back to Ivory Coast's main city and speak to the BBC's John James. John, thank you for joining us. Lots of our viewers getting in touch saying it's time for Laurent Gbagbo to go. Is there any sign that he will heed that advice?
Not for the time being, no. We haven't heard really anything from him that would give the indication that he's willing to step down and say that Alassane Ouattara won the vote. There was a bit of optimism, I think, at the start of the week from the UN and the French talking about a deal being imminent with Laurent Gbagbo surrendering. But in an interview he gave with some French press, he really scotched those rumours, and he's been pretty defiant almost since the beginning of December, really, saying that he was the winner and that although he's happy to talk with Alassane Ouattara, he's not budging from that. And I think we haven't seen that position change at all, despite the diplomatic isolation, despite international sanctions, despite huge pressure, and now a military attempt at a solution.
John, stay with us if you can, because I have an email from an Indian in Abidjan I'd like to put to you. But just before I do, a reminder, if you're calling in, your calls go through to Bush House, the home of the BBC World Service, where the World Have Your Say team are answering your calls. We're getting some of you in touch from Mauritania, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Uganda, France, Malta, Germany, Liberia, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Luxembourg, Nigeria, Ethiopia and Tanzania, and you can see the team there answering your calls, so please do keep them going. Now, let's pull up an email here from Navneet, who's an Indian in Abidjan. Well, I can read it if we can't pull it up. Here it comes. I think we can pull it up. There's a lot of looting, says Navneet. One cannot recognize from which side they are. There are 37 of us stuck here with nothing to eat or drink. We're looking for help from the French army. John James, we were told several days ago by the UN it would be putting more troops on the street to stop the looting. Is there any evidence that's happened?
Well, I mean, they're talking about round-the-clock patrols, but the UN and the French, and indeed, we've just been inside Abidjan, and we saw a French patrol that came to pick up an Ivorian French national who was there, who wanted to leave with the French forces. So clearly, some things are happening, but the French are about 1,600. The UN have about 10,000 or so peacekeepers, and it's difficult for them. And it's 4 million people to deal with all the calls, and there's good signs that the French are favouring their nationals and perhaps Europeans even above other people who might be in trouble as well. So not, I think many people are calling them. The numbers are widely known, but they're not really intervening in a lot of cases. And just to back up what the person who wrote in there said, I mean, I've just heard from one person who said the route from the centre of the city to the airport, normally a wide boulevard with the big modern shops, that it's almost completely unrecognisable. All the shops there looted by one side or the other.
Thank you very much for speaking to us, John. Well, you're just on the outskirts of Abidjan. Liz is in the city itself. She's an American married to an Ivorian. Liz, is your neighbourhood recognisable, or has it been looted and damaged in many ways?
I haven't really gone outside my one block neighborhood. We actually have water today. That's good. And I sent my bon out to get some vegetables for us, and she was able to find food. So things are coming back to normal, it seems.
And you're not the first person to say that to us.
I still don't feel like it's safe for me to walk around because I kind of stick out,
I can understand that. Liz, thank you for speaking to us. It's interesting how many people are saying things are getting better, if not normal. I've got a point here for you, Jacques Nduba, a keen supporter of Alassane Ouattara. It's from Brighton in Zambia, who says the greedy Gbagbo deserves to be kicked out of this country with a bullet if necessary. Do you agree with that?
Oh, no, at the moment, this is not our option. This is not the option of Mr. Ouattara, the president. But we still have an open window for dialogue with Mr. Gbagbo, despite the blockage around his residence. But killing Gbagbo is not the best way to resolve the issue. And this is what Mr. Ouattara is thinking. But we think, okay, with the time coming, he's going to understand reason.
Balier Topler, do you fear for the life of the man you speak for?
Say again, please.
Do you fear for the life of Laurent Gbagbo?
Of course. Of course, because I would be very surprised that just a post-electoral crisis can lead to the killing of one President Gbagbo. And I'm surprised that no one can understand what's going on really in Côte d'Ivoire.
Well, I tell you what, sir, you've had a number of chances.
Give me just 1 second.
I'm going to jump in just because we're up against the end of the programme. I'll give you more than 1 second. I'll give you plenty of time in the second edition of the programme. But you've already detailed your frustrations with the process and the intervention of the UN and French people. If you're watching us here on BBC World News, have you been convinced by the points that Balier Topler's been making? If you're on Facebook, go to facebook.com/World Have Your Say, click the like button and you can get involved. I'll speak to you in a couple of minutes. Goodbye. Hello, I'm Ross Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, all week long you've been concerned with the situation in Ivory Coast, and for the next half an hour we've political allies of Alassane Ouattara and Laurent Gbagbo live with us to answer your questions. So wherever you're watching BBC World News, you're very welcome to take part. Well, let me introduce you to our two guests. Balier Topler is a Paris-based spokesperson for Laurent Gbagbo, and Jacques Nduba is a London representative of the PDCI. That's one of the political parties in Ivory Coast that is supporting Alassane Ouattara. Both men are here live on BBC World News to answer your questions. But let's bring ourselves up to date with all of the day's news before we get on with that. And we're going to begin in Ivory Coast, where aid agencies are now warning that the humanitarian crisis in Abidjan is being exacerbated. They say that continuing violence is preventing help reaching those who need it. And on the same issue, the UN has appealed for safe access to civilians who are fleeing the fighting. Staying in Ivory Coast, the UN has reported that it's found 100 bodies in Douekwe and 2 other western towns. The UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights says that the murders appear to be ethnically motivated. From Ivory Coast to the situation in Libya, NATO has said it strongly regrets the loss of life after a friendly fire attack on rebel tanks in eastern Libya, which left at least 4 fighters dead. Earlier, a NATO commander had refused to apologise, saying that until Thursday's strike, the alliance hadn't even been aware that the rebels had tanks. In Syria, riot police have clashed with anti-government protesters in several areas across the country. The worst of the unrest has been in the southern city of Daraa, where police used live ammunition against thousands of demonstrators. At least 10 people are reported to have been shot dead. Meanwhile, in Yemen, tens of thousands of people have held pro- and anti-government protests. These demos come at the end of a week when at least 20 people have died during further unrest. Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh is not going anywhere, as he has done time and time again. He's refusing to step down and has rejected an exit plan proposed by Gulf Arab states. Well, many thanks to both of our guests for joining us. Balaye Topla is a spokesperson for Laurent Gbagbo. He's live with us from Paris. And Jacques Ndouba is a London representative of PDCI. That's not Alassane Ouattara's party, but it's a party which supports Alassane Ouattara. And before I bring in your calls and emails, just before the break, Balaye Topla, you were telling us, why don't people understand the reality in Ivory Coast? In a few words, tell us what that reality is that you believe so many people are missing.
Okay, let me put that this way. This election is not a simple election. This election was supposed to end a cycle beginning in 2002 with a coup d'etat attempt that became a rebellion in the country. From peace agreement to peace agreement, we arrived in Ouagadougou with the agreement of Ouagadougou. But all those who involved in this crisis failed to solve the problem because the concern was not to solve really the problem, just to remove President Gbagbo from the power.
Okay, well, let's see if our
Let me give you a simple example.
Well,
let me give you a simple example.
A brief example, if you would, because there are many, many people around the world wanting to speak to you. So a brief example.
Okay. UN forces were in Côte d'Ivoire to disarm the rebels before the election. They didn't do so, and you see the outcome of the election. So I think, and in the actual case we have case of error in this election, but no one won't take time to investigate.
Okay, so
how
you're saying
do you understand that
the new rebels... So let me interrupt you here because we've got so many people wanting to speak to you, but you say the new rebels in the north, this was one half of the civil war going back to 2002, but the forces remain in place. You say the new rebels should have been disarmed by the UN, and the fact they're able to march into Abidjan now in support of Alassane Ouattara is proof the UN didn't do its job. If you're watching BBC World News,
exactly.
Do you think
That's
that Balaye is right? Balaye, let's give everyone else a chance to respond to what you're saying. What have you say at bbc.com is the email, or call us up, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. I can see that some of you in Cameroon, Zimbabwe, the Netherlands, Australia, Uganda and Zambia are doing that. We're answering your calls just as quickly as we can. Now, let's bring up a couple of emails which you've sent into us. First of all, James, that's not his real name. He's an Ivorian in London, and he says, I do not support Gbagbo, but Ouattara is not a saint. He has blood on his hands too. I'm tired of seeing people play down the atrocities committed by his men in Douekwe and even in Abidjan. And Abdelila on Facebook. Abdelila is a regular from Morocco on the World Have Your Say blog and Facebook page. What are the chances of preserving national unity in Ivory Coast under the rule of Ouattara? Well, let's put that point to Jacques Ndouba. We don't know what happened in Douekwe. The UN has said it's not possible to prove how those hundreds of people died, but there are many allegations against the man you support that people supporting him have committed atrocities. Do you think that needs to be investigated?
I think that the people need to make a clear difference between what happened in Dokwe, in other areas in Ivory Coast during the war, but they don't do that. What is in place in those areas is that there have been ethnic fighting within communities and people die, and this has been proved everywhere during the war and during this military action that have been taken against Gbagbo, and those are the kind of thing that they want to make as a difference. It's not a systematic killing.
But Jacques, do you accept the possibility that serious human rights abuses may have been carried out by men fighting in the name of Alassane Ouattara?
Yeah, we accept that, but we want to bring people to justice. This is what the president said.
Okay, thank you for that point.
That's it.
Balié Topla, what about this issue of whether Alassane Ouattara could unite the country? I know you don't want to countenance this idea, but if Alassane Ouattara becomes the president of Ivory Coast, do you think it is possible he could unite all Ivorians?
I'm just surprised that people just discovered the massive killing in Dokwe. In Ivory Coast, Mr. Ouattara's rebellion has been killing people since 2002. So I'm just surprised that you realize right now that the Ouattara's rebellion is killing people in Côte d'Ivoire.
Okay, well, I think it's worth, these things can get very complicated, but it's worth pointing out that the new forces in 2002 were not fighting in Alassane Ouattara's name. They are a force who have come together with Alassane Ouattara for the purposes of seeing him take up the presidency since the elections in November 2010. Now, let's bring in Diaby, who's in Accra, though he's been very recently in Ivory Coast. He joins us over the internet. Diaby, tell us why you're in Accra.
Yeah, I'm in Accra first because I had to leave country because of several threats. And now what I'm trying to do, we're monitoring a call center we implemented here to help the victims on the ground.
So you're running a call center to help people who are in trouble back in Ivory Coast. Can you give us more details of the kind of threats that you experienced when you were back in the country?
For instance, I was blacklisted access to the airport.
Just say that once more, Diaby. It sounds like we've got some interference on your line. No, I'm going to come off that. It sounds like your cell phone might be interrupting the microphone. Not to worry. Thank you very much indeed. Alan Kenya has posted on facebook.com/World Have Your Say, saying, I bet other power-thirsty African rulers are taking lessons. Whatever happens, Gbagbo ought to be captured alive to face justice. And Tangwa, posting on worldhaveyoursay.com, has a point which maybe Jacques and Duba you could pick up on. He says, what about organising a new election in which neither Gbagbo or Ouattara could stand? Is that a realistic proposition, Jacques and Duba?
The point is not, okay, reorganizing a new election, but the point is the acceptance of the result. To accept the result of the election, and this is common in Africa, in many countries of Africa. And this is what Gbagbo is trying to copy. But we cannot reorganize any other election. We did much up to now. But Gbagbo's problem is that if he cannot win an election, we have to repeat election every time. But we cannot do that now.
But Jacques, what about the point? There'll be Zimbabweans watching this, Kenyans watching this, who'll think about their national unity governments, which were born out of elections which couldn't be resolved for the sake of peace. Shouldn't Ivory Coast consider that if it just simply means this humanitarian crisis is resolved and no more people die in the killing?
Yeah, but this window has been open since. We went around the world, everywhere. ECOMOG, ECOWAS, Western. This is the Western organization in Africa, and we went to the African Union, and we went to the UN. Everybody proposed something to Gbagbo to form a coalition government, but it didn't accept that. But what is taking place now is that, okay, you want to change what is wrong to the truth, but this cannot work.
Let's see if there are particularly Kenyans or Zimbabweans who are watching and who think that you're making a correct point. Do those of you watching think actually a national unity government is the best way out of this? You can call us up. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Understandably, Alassane Ouattara and Laurent Gbagbo are otherwise predisposed. So we've got allies of theirs coming on to answer your questions. Let's cross to the World Have Your Say news desk, where Ben from the team has been answering some of your calls. Ben, what have you been hearing?
Hi, Ros. Yeah, and since you updated us last, we've been hearing from the Philippines, Belgium, South Africa. Nula's just been on the line too, I think Samuel in Accra. Now, generally, many people are calling for Gbagbo to quit. Some are claiming it'd be for the greater good in Ivory Coast. Others saying a recount would be the thing to stop the bloodbath. That came in from Abraham in Nigeria. Now, others are phoning to talk about UN involvement in the country. 2 points here. Brian in Liberia called to say he wants to see more robust action from the UN, a bit like in Libya that we're seeing at the moment. But then also Bavo in Jamaica asked this question: why, in his view, does the UN always take the side of the opposition in these situations?
Ben, thanks very much indeed. All right, well, let's pick up straight away on the involvement of the UN. Thanks to those of you who've called up raising it. Balaye Topler, I'm guessing that you don't approve of how the UN has become involved in this crisis.
Yeah, I think that things are very complicated because French government involves so arrogantly.
But let's talk, Balaye, let's talk about the United Nations. The United Nations is the organisation which the man you speak for, Laurent Gbagbo, invited into Ivory Coast to help run these elections. Do you think that was a mistake?
When we created United Nations organization, it was to prevent war in countries. So it was the right thing before this, in front of the situation the country was facing, to call united forces. But the problem is that forces exceeded its order.
Okay, well, let me at this point jump in here, because you say it's exceeding its order. This is an accusation many people have made watching BBC World News. Let me read one moment, sir. Let me read you the UN resolution that was passed in recent days. It sanctions all necessary means to prevent the use of heavy weapons against the civilian population. And the head of UN peacekeeping has said, if heavy weapons had not been shelling us and civilians in the last 3 days, we would not have undertaken this military operation. We'll keep on talking about the way the UN has intervened in the crisis in Ivory Coast in a couple of minutes' time. I'm Ross Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Our two guests today are Balaye Topler, a spokesperson for Laurent Gbagbo. He's live with us from Paris. And also Jacques Ndouba, who is from the PDCI political party, which is part of a grouping which supports Alassane Ouattara in Ivory Coast. Both are taking your questions live for both editions of World Have Your Say. And I can see that we've got calls coming in from Morocco, Russia, Bahrain, Kenya, Greece and Algeria. Do remember, if you don't get on air during this edition, we're back at 18:30 GMT on BBC World News for World Have Your Say Extra. Let's bring in Christophe. He is a blogger live with us from Paris. Christophe, of course, the French troops, hundreds of them are involved in Abidjan. What's your point or question for our two guests?
Well, the question that I will have is, do you believe that the French operations and the French troops wants to emphasize on the humanitarian side of the situation, not the political side of the situation? So how do you feel the French involvement?
Well, maybe Jacques Ndouba, you could comment on that.
Yes. What they need to know is that the French army in Ivory Coast got the UN resolution and backing to support the UN troop in Ivory Coast. So they are not acting in the way that they want to do it, but they got a backing from the UN Council. So they need to understand that.
Are you convinced, though, Jacques, that the French are neutral, or are they actually on your side, the side of Alassane Ouattara?
I know that they are very neutral, because everything that they have taken action have been decided by the UN, because they asked the UN before they act. And this is what we've been seeing since. They don't take action when they want and, wherever they want to do it.
Jacques, thank you for those comments. As you were talking, we were seeing some pictures of French evacuations in Abidjan. Christophe, what's your view of this? Do you believe that your troops have remained neutral?
Well, I believe that the troops want to remain neutral, and they want to communicate in that sense, in that direction. They want to say, we are not taking care of politics, we're just taking care of a humanitarian situation, which is what the politicians are trying to say in France, since France tries to turn the page of its colonial past. And it's really important for the French government to say, we are not taking care of the political side, just saving people's life.
Good to speak to you, Christophe. If you'd like to read Christophe's work, go to genistry.com. Let's pull up an email that's come in from Adam in Boston. Adam says, Mr. Gbagbo is absolutely delusional. He says he doesn't want to die or be a martyr or surrender. I understand this stubbornness is due to his beliefs. Please shed some light on this. Well, maybe, Ballier, you can do that. How can you explain that Mr. Gbagbo will stay in that cellar at the presidential compound when everything suggests that his time in power is over?
One more time, let me be clear with you. Ivory Coast is a sovereign country, and all events, the most important, the presidential election, goes by our constitution. If we don't come back to that constitution, we will never find a solution. I have heard you guys saying international community. One more time, let me be clear with you. International community doesn't run the country in Côte d'Ivoire. If we want to solve this problem, we need to go for our rules, by our constitution.
And again, I'm going to be clear and say that, of course, the international community doesn't run Ivory Coast, but it must be stated that before this election in November, Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara agreed that the UN would sanction the result, and the UN sanctioned the result from the Electoral Commission, which said that Alassane Ouattara won. Let's quickly bring in Jacob, who's a Liberian in Abidjan. Jacob, how are things in your part of town?
Well, I am probably right near the airport. Well, first of all, I have advice to just give to the Ivorian, because my wife is also an Ivorian. I believe that what the Ivorian need to do right now is to forget about 2000, 2003, this are happening. I believe that now is the time for them to set a positive objective for tomorrow. Because if they continue to do this, the Constitution says, the Constitution do this and that. They will continue, the problem of the Ivorian will continue to go on and on and on.
All right, so your point is that this is actually an opportunity for Laurent Gbagbo to show what kind of man he is, to stand down for the benefit of the country. I can see that Nora in Ivory Coast has got in touch saying, Ouattara is a fraudster, do not believe him, we won't let him rule us, our people will not let us. A warning that perhaps even if Laurent Gbagbo were to surrender, national unity is not at all guaranteed. Well, Ballier Topler, spokesperson for Laurent Gbagbo, and Jacques Nduba, a supporter of Alassane Ouattara. Thanks for your time, and thanks to all of you for watching. I'll speak to you soon.